Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hello, Dad. Good morning. Thanks for having me on the show. I want to talk about the news this week, since we haven't gone over it for a few weeks now. And we'll try and go back and forth and tie the news into the Pulling the Strings series, in which we're investigating now the real power behind all the thrones, the people that are pulling the strings, that are essentially responsible for our news. And I think that's a really important point, Dad, is to remember that none of the news that we see, especially anything that comes over the mainstream media, but most of the alternative media as well, is all stuff that's there for us to see. We're supposed to see it, and we're supposed to be moved by it in the way that the people that produce the news expect us to be moved. I mean, they're not doing it for nothing. All the strings are being pulled, and I believe it's because we finally reached a time in history where the string pullers have enough influence now to take it to their next step. And their next step has always been projected to be World War III, between the Muslims and the Zionists, and bringing the atheists and the religious into it to fight it out until, well, I suppose depopulation is the result. And they can then come and set up their one world government as an answer to, and the public begging for someone to help them rebuild out of the rubble of the coming war. And that force that's going to rebuild out of the rubble of the coming war has already determined the kind of world they want, in which all systems are under their control. There's no national boundaries. There's no economic boundaries, and there's absolutely will be no religious boundaries. Religion will be blamed for the coming war, and it will be made illegal. There will be no more talk of Jesus or Jehovah or Messiahs or any of this stuff. In fact, it would seem that they're going to bring about a Messiah for all of us, so that we all can worship one of the ascended masters. Because what we're all going to really worship in the end is knowledge, enlightenment, the knowledge of good and evil that, thank goodness, Satan released us from our binds of ignorance and provided knowledge to the world. That's the way their narrative seems to run. And so I believe all the news must be seen now in a context in which this final maneuver isn't coming about accidentally or organically. It's been something that's been in the works for probably a couple of 100 years, certainly the last 100 years. And it's all based on a timing that depends on how well you can manipulate the game board. For instance, they tried to set up, I think it was Nathan Rothschild, tried to set up a League of Nations type of organization after the Napoleonic Wars in 1814. And the Russian Tsar shot it down and said, I see through this scheme. There's no way that I'm throwing in with this deal. And apparently Nathan Rothschild vowed that he or his descendants one day would destroy the Tsar's rule over Russia. And if you know your history, it happened about 100 years later, where the Rothschild-funded Bolshevik Revolution killed the Tsar and his family, his children, and they've never had any power in Russia again. And not only that, Orthodox Christianity was slaughtered, and is still slaughtered, but for about 70 years there, it was simply slaughtered wholesale across that whole region. Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, all these stands that have their Orthodox Christianity from the time when the tribes fled through the Caucasus Mountains. This is where a lot of these Jews went, and then at the persecution of the Jews after the fall of their temple, many of them went to join these communities that have been around for a long time. And so they grew up into the Orthodox Christian religion, which has then been at war with the Catholic religion because the Catholics were infiltrated by the very same people that are bringing about World War III. And certainly the Catholic Church is part of the instigation of World War III. Although I believe they're going to be pointed to as the scapegoat. That's why Christians in America imagine the Vatican as the beast of Revelation and the Pope is the Antichrist, because it's exactly what the people who feed you your news want you to think. So I hope you'll join us for the Pulling the Strings series, in which we're going to try and keep connecting these various people and moments in history until they make a continuous thread all the way from it depends on what time frame. I'd like to go all the way back to the 10 tribes being scattered. That's what I'm studying, and where they went and how they got involved with this Kabbalistic knowledge, or how they essentially perverted their knowledge of the scriptures into this Kabbalistic knowledge based on the mysteries of Babylon. And of course, all the way back to the Babylon of Nimrod. And if you follow that story, it would seem that there's people that claim that they're carrying these secrets that the sons of God, divine secrets that the Watchers brought. So that's all part of our Pulling the Strings study. But if that doesn't connect in your mind to the news that you're reading, then I think you're part of the naive bunch that's being led around by your noses, by the manipulators. And so something from this was from almost a month ago now, April 5th, this article about the Panama Papers. This particular article says Iceland's leader is first victim of offshore holdings leak. Well, naturally, because Iceland was the country that decided to throw the bankers out of there and try and straighten out their country. So I don't think it's any surprise, not to me, that Iceland's leaders become the first victim of the offshore holdings leak. And this offshore holdings leak, of course, if you read between the lines, it's pretty interesting that it just so happens to implicate all the people that the US of A and England and all these terrorists of the world call enemies. Russia, China, Venezuela, right? Funny how these Panama Papers all point to the leaders of these countries as somehow being, thieves, criminals. But funny enough, the Panama Papers don't implicate any of our American leaders of industry or Congress, or which is hysterical, considering that it's our country, under our banking system, under our United Nations, that has made the world what it is. So if anybody's guilty of stealing money, you can imagine it's all these crumb bums at the top of our government, along with all the governments. This is how the game is played. They get to steal money from their people as long as they pull those strings that they're told to pull when they're told to pull them. So anyway, that's my take on the Panama Papers. More BS propaganda to just keep stoking the fires of stupid Americans, stupid Western Europeans like the English, stupid Australians, stupid people all over the world that imagine that because it comes over the Associated Press or some talking head on their television says it, well, there must be some facts involved. And the fact is you're being manipulated by the people that want you to know things. And I say that the common thread right now is what they want you to know is we got lots of enemies. And they're threatening us on every side. Cyber attacks, everything. We got to mistrust everybody. They're all our enemies. And the only solution, it would seem, if you read these papers, is to keep building weapons. More and more and more weapons, because that's the only way we can ever have stability in the world. None of these journalists ever talk about the fact that the first two world wars came off exactly as they were predicted in the Albert Pike letters, and that the Third World War is setting up is exactly as predicted by Albert Pike. Funny, all these wonderful journalists, and I don't come across any of that. Okay, so the Panama Papers. Now we got, I'm kind of working backward from the older stuff that I had been pulling out. And this is our favorite Business Insider. These are the guys that have all the wonderful graphics, know where everybody's at. Even our Pentagon doesn't know where everybody's at, but these guys do. Title of this one from April 11th, Business Insider. Assad has taken Russia hostage, and what comes next could be, quote, the worst this war has seen. So all of you that were talking about the truce, they got a truce working. Russia and America are working together, right? That's a story they've been giving us for how many months now, and we've been saying on this show that, in fact, there was no, the truce was just a phantom, just a smoke screen, because there's no grounds for a truce. Neither side wants to budge an inch, and so while both sides are being funded heavily and heavily armed, well, yeah, we can keep talking truce, but as I said, it's like talking peace process. Peace process means more killing, more weapons. Truce means more killing, more weapons, right? Utopia in this world means absolute control of the killing and the education and the finances of all the world into a system of complete manipulation. That's what we call freedom and democracy and utopia. So if you just get straight that what comes over the news are pure lies, then you can start reading what sort of lies and from who and for why. And, the single easiest current to read into all this is war, war, war. They want war. They want slaughter. Because if they didn't, the people that run the world that have been trying to control it through their United Nations since 1814, when Nathan Rothschild suggested, hey, give all the guns to us. Give the universal power over the world's governments to us so we can stop all this terrible bloodshed. Since we're the ones that started it. If you give it to us, we can stop it. And the Tsar said, no way, are we going to let you take over our world? And so, yeah, they got rid of the Tsar. World War I came off just what they planned to do, establish communism. And then World War II gave communism its foothold to become equal to Christianity, which they said they would then hold back. Read Cold War, meaning after World War II, we had all the power in the world. America and its allies could pretty much create any system they wanted. And so what did they do? They created the United Nations, and then according to the plan, held back on actually putting a stop or moving forward with the idea of weapons reductions. No, instead we had a Cold War in which we saw the increase of the weapons and the power on the other side so that there could be two forces of some sort of parity. You could have Russia on one side and they could fund China with weapons, and they could fund Syria with weapons, and maybe they can send Iran some weapons. And now you got one side that's got plenty of weapons for destruction. And meanwhile, the Christians were held back so that rather than, use the power that they gained after World War II to institute a world without weapons, what they did was they helped bring about a world with weapons, and they helped bring about this false Christianity in which everybody's a Judeo-Christian now. And we got to fight for Israel because that's God's people. So all this lies. And of course, what they were able to finally do after World War II, where they had nobody left to stop them, was they finally did build their United Nations and declare that they would run the world from there. And essentially, they've been manipulating the world into the position of World War III ever since. That's what's really gone on, if you want to look at it. And so here we are, we're coming down the home stretch. It's almost time for World War III. And, Assad taking Russia hostage, all these things are puppets being played. None of this is even true. Syria, as I said, go back a few years. What was really happening? Nothing. Just like in Libya. Libya actually had the highest standard of living in all of Africa and most of Europe. So, instead that's been turned into a cesspool of radicalism. Egypt as well. I'm starting to learn that Egypt was one of these foundations of the mysteries. Egypt is where the Muslim Brotherhood and all these oldest connected organizations and institutions that are part of bringing the world to war. And that's why it was time to sort of take out the stability that had been fostered in Egypt since the Second World War, essentially, and make, it's time to get Egypt ready. Loosen up all the reins in Egypt so the radicals and those institutions can start preparing for the war that's coming. Anybody that doesn't see that is absolutely blind. I mean, it looks like they're even, I can't help it, Dad. I'm starting to think, man, they're really going to give us Donald Trump as a president, And I've got an article in here this week about that, and we'll get to it here in a minute. For now, let's move on. Here's one from April 30th, just yesterday. Russia defends intercept of U.S. reconnaissance plane over the Baltic. And so for some reason, we're sending a reconnaissance plane, U.S. Air Force RC-135, had been flying a routine route in international airspace, and that the Russian Su-27 fighter had intercepted it in a, quote, unsafe and unprofessional way. That's the way we're presenting it. Of course, what Russia's saying is, quote, all flights of Russian planes are conducted in accordance with international regulations on the use of airspace. And they're also saying that we're already starting to get used to the insults of the Pentagon regarding alleged unprofessional maneuvers when our fighters intercept U.S. spy planes at the Russian border. Of course, the problem seems to be, according to this article, that the plane didn't have its transponder on. Our American reconnaissance plane was not only flying in their space, but did not have its transponder on, so the Russians couldn't tell what kind of plane it was. So naturally, they got to send up an interceptor just like we would. But do we report it that way? Nah, more contention. And it's funny that it's almost like a tit for tat, because just a couple of weeks ago on April 14th, the Business Insider reported, here's why the Navy didn't shoot down the Russian fighter jets that buzzed by a U.S. destroyer. And they've got these photos, boy, of the Russian fighter planes just right off the destroyer, like right next to it. And so, yeah, why didn't they shoot them down? Well, this is what the commanding officer said. You don't get to kill people just because they're being annoying. We're not at war with Russia. It would be one thing to be operating and have a threatening attack profile from someone who might not recognize me. That's not the case here. So why'd the Russian plane buzz the destroyer? I'm going to tell you what I think, Dad, is they're testing all of their equipment right now. That way when it comes live time, just like a 9/11, just like the Boston bombings, just like everything else false flag, they've always got another operation going on at the same time as a plausible deniability or distraction to the real thing. And so in this case, it's a matter of getting all their data straight, getting their instruments coordinated, right? That way they know who's who, what kind of blip it makes, what kind of reaction time they all have, because they're about to stage some false flags to bring everyone into this war. And so I guess it helps if you've got all your ducks in a row. And how do you do that? We have a few practice flyby, right? You have some, you stage the circumstances under which you're later going to stage the war. So that's what I see happening there. Now, this is kind of funny. From April 15th, North Korean missile launch a catastrophic failure. This is why we're also been so petrified about North Korea. And so now they're go ahead and show us. I guess maybe the hype was getting too much. People were starting to get really scared. So, what's the top article this past month? Their missile blew up on launch for them, a meaningful celebration, right? Missile launch meant to celebrate the birthday of the country's founder ended in failure, an embarrassing setback. So, I read the article. I don't remember anything about, so now we can laugh at the threat of North Korea. No, not necessarily. We're still going to keep the tensions high. And what I find most interesting this week that we'll get to is what's going on with Russia and China now. That's all tied into this Korean threat. Speaking of our good friend South Korea, this was an article that I just came across a couple of weeks ago, April 19th, out of, I can't tell what rag this is. It's by Jay Busby, and I just can't tell. Is this Yahoo Sports? I don't know what kind of rag this article is being carried by, but it's April 19th by Jay Busby, title, South Korea Rounded Up Abused Vagrants Before 1988 Games. And just, why this is suddenly so newsworthy, but they point out that because we're 2 years ahead of the 2018 Olympic Games slated for South Korea, they're bringing up that the last time South Korea won the bid for the Games in 88, this says, in the ensuing 7 years, the AP report charges the South Korean government oversaw a brutal, widespread program of cleansing that resulted in horrific human rights violations. Quote, thousands, the homeless, the drunk, but mostly children and the disabled, were rounded up off the streets ahead of the 1988 Seoul Olympics, which the ruling dictator saw as an international validation of South Korea's arrival as a modern country. Of course, with all the first-class journalism in America, because we're so free and educated and aware, none of this did anything to stop the Olympics. None of this did anything, about anything. But now, here we are 20 years later, 30 years later, talking about, look what South Korea did. They went and essentially, human rights violations to prepare so the world could come and see them in a different light than they really exist. Now, is this true? Is this propaganda? I don't know. You have to look at it both ways. If it's true, they hid it from us all these years because, of course, we send a lot of money to South Korea. They're our ally. We send a lot of military over there, right? Right after Second World War, this wonderful, great America, if you bother to do the research, has been involved in nothing but wars. I think we got 30 or 40 of them always going on around the world. And Korea was one of the first ones. We were over at war with Korea, and interesting enough, our good friend South Korea apparently is just as big a human rights violator as our arch enemy Assad in Syria, or the North Korean When is there consistency in the way morality is, or ethics, or our foreign policy is administered? Right? There's not. And perhaps this is the whole nature of this propaganda, to simply cast doubt on all of the modern political prostitution. Because I believe, America is going to be thrown under the bus in this new war. This is a war that's going to result in the enlightened crowd pointing out all of the skeletons in the closet, which is why those skeletons were A, produced, and B, hidden from us all these years. But they're going to bring out 9/11. They're going to bring out all these things at some point in the light that they want people to see them in, so that they can get rid of the people they want to get rid of by simply blaming all these things on them, which of course many of them are guilty. Many of them were having their strings pulled at the time, like a Lee Harvey Oswald, who realized after the fact, whoa, crud, I'm just a patsy. What are you guys talking about? I shot the president? Are you kidding me? See, so, look at the way they do it, right? Apparently the Navy SEAL team that was able to infiltrate Osama bin Laden's compound and kill him, well, they all died in helicopter crashes, darn it. We don't get many helicopter crashes, but just coincidentally, a couple of helicopter crashes that killed the team that knew what really happened at that compound. So start, seeing the news for what it is: lies, deception, masquerades. The news that we read are masks. So what is this one masking? That we're going to throw South Korea under the bus at some point? Or is this masking some other chip piece that's going to play into this next world war? But anyway, I thought it was interesting. I'd never heard about this before. At least it's never been a big deal with our good friend South Korea. No one ever brings it up when it comes to sending money and weapons their way. That what their government does is human rights violations at the drop of a hat, because they're going to have a commercial interest in their country. Not even to kill dissidents. I mean, if they're doing that to drunks and children and disabled people that are on the streets, what are they doing to anybody who threatens their rulership? Well, we know it's the same all over the world. We are the terrorists. We support the terrorists. And then through our organized manipulation of media, we make the terrorists look like freedom fighters. And the people that they kill look like terrorists. So anyway, I just figured that was interesting, the way South Korea is now being brought up in a 30-year-old, pointing the finger back to 30 years ago. Yeah, here's the one that I thought was funny, Dad. This is from, maybe it's been reposted. I thought I had this up here. It's a Fiscal Times article by Rob Garver, which appears to be from yesterday, Saturday the 30th. There's only one country that isn't worried about a Trump presidency. I thought this was too funny. They're pointing out that nearly every country in the civilized and uncivilized world is absolutely shaken in their boots at the idea of this maniac, right-wing, literal clown, literal moron, complete puppet of the system, been brought about now to be our new president of the United States. And every country in the world is going, how is this even, how is it possible? How far is America going to fall that they're going to, this is who's going to represent the United States of America? This right-wing Islamophobic, thief, criminal? This man's a criminal. He's nothing but part of the criminal money elite that's gained everything from being a criminal his entire life, using the system to criminalize his gaining of wealth, like all of them, like Warren Buffett, like George Soros, like all these idiots He's just that far down on the rung. He's like a little rat, a little sewer rat getting his chance at a bigger chunk of cheese. And the rest of the world is going, oh my goodness, is this, what kind of nightmare, what kind of Alice in Wonderland frickin' fiction are we in that they're seriously going to elect Donald Trump? But guess what? There's one country that's not worried about Trump. Russia. Russia, right? The other country with all the weapons in the world. Why would they be worried about a guy who's threatening to push the button and lock up everybody and close off borders? I mean, why would they be worried about a guy that can't wait to send those missiles and go to war and kill and use our strength, our good American terroristic strength, to get our way in the world? So yeah, only Russia's not worried. I find that very interesting. That Russia's not worried about a maniac like this is now going to have his finger on the button, and the sort of Congress that might support a maniac, puppet like Donald Trump. Why would Russia not be concerned? Well, because the same people are pulling both strings. It means, we're going to get the two people we need ready to send the weapons. So while the whole rest of the world is going, this is a bad dream. Is it even possible? Is it even possible that the American people are so duped, so blind, so disconnected from reality that they imagine Donald Trump is what's good for America, when anybody anywhere that isn't completely connected to the American matrix can see what a complete catastrophe Donald Trump is. I mean, this is certainly a step toward New World Order, one world regime. Don't get out of line or we'll throw you in jail, right? The freedom of the press, meaning freedom to print what's good for America, right? Freedom of religion, being free to worship what we say is okay to worship. Freedom of the financial and economic system to be those with the most power get to keep calling the rules. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, to me, this really points to the end of the world. This really points to the fact that there is nothing left in the world of decency. There's nothing left of intelligence. Nobody seems to point to Trump and say, that's impossible. How could he represent the American people? The American people are a bunch of people that get $18,000 a year and can't afford a home and can't afford a car. And what they need is for the morons, the thieves like Donald Trump, to be hung and all of their assets to be redistributed. But that, of course, they point out is communism and socialism. But no, it is socialism already, as they take all of the assets from the country and give it to a handful of people who already have everything at the top. That's real socialism. That's real communism, if you remember how it operated. The communist government gave all the assets to their friends, and the people worked for those few people. And when they broke up communist Russia, what did it result in? Those few oligarchs stealing every asset of the country, and the people of Russia being so poor that they were starving. Well, welcome to the future of America. I don't care which president you elect, it's still the same thing. We had our chance 100 years ago when a few of the decent American patriots, if you will, were trying to throw the Federal Reserve System out of our country. We're trying to denounce these secret societies, these fraternal societies that are supported by all the Donald Trumps of the world, to say, you can't let these people get their hooks into our country. But of course they did. And every president since then, every president since Woodrow Wilson has essentially been on their side. I think there was one following him that they either killed or got rid of. But up into our world, sorry, JFK did what he was told until it appears they killed him because he was Catholic, and perhaps because he had plans to change some things that they didn't want changed. And if that had to do with the Federal Reserve, well, certainly he would have known better than anyone that that wasn't something he was able to do. But he went along with them with the war, getting into Vietnam, all the things that were completely wrong. Kennedy was quite at home with signing us up for all those things. But obviously, he wasn't completely on the right team, because they blew his head off and they blew his brother's head off. So there was something going on there that the Kennedys were pulling against the chain. But nobody even has come close ever since. I'm sorry, Clinton was a total lie. Obama was a total lie. If Bernie Sanders is anything more than a distraction, and if he were somehow elected president, he'd turn out to be a total lie, because they don't let us elect people that we can select. We can't elect good, strong, patriotic people who would give their own lives for the country, give their own wealth for the country to see the country get stronger. Come on, those people are long gone. We are given a bunch of lawyers and mouthpieces, most of which have spent a lifetime stealing from their constituencies, signing bills that they don't even read, given to them by pharmaceutical companies, given to them by the military-industrial complex, given to them by the education or the unions. And they just sign it because that's what they're told to do. So, yeah, only one country in the world isn't worried about a Trump presidency. Happens to be the other country full of nuclear weapons. Fun, fun, fun coming to us, people. Okay, so here's now some of the signs of our times, Dad, from what I can put together. We've got Business Insider here from April 25th by Alex Lockey. Iran unveils new main battle tank made from U.S. and Chinese designs from the 1960s. And the article's kind of funny because it points out that these tanks are, practically useless in the sense of, being up to par, having any sort of competitive nature. I'll read you a couple paragraphs. The tank appears to have the main hull and engine of the U.S.'s M47M Patton, a variation of the M47 Patton made in the early 1960s, and the turrets of China's Type 5969 tank first produced in 1958. The TM sports, that's the name of this tank. The TM sports a 105 millimeter rifled main cannon, slightly underpowered when compared to the 120 millimeter cannons found on U.S. and German tanks, or the 125 millimeter cannons found on newer Russian tanks. Funny, Dad, everything I keep finding out is, Russia's just been upgrading while we're sitting here, being held in check, like the Pike letter about World War III projected. We'll build up the communist side while we hold in check the Christian side. And so here you go. It just so happens that we not only don't stop them from producing a military through our United Nations, but we watch them produce a military, superior to our own. We've seen a few articles that way, and I've measured them against the article we saw that in 2008 they reported when Russia went after in Georgia, the conflict when Georgia tried to split away. Russia was completely outgunned by the NATO weapons that Georgia was using in 2008. Their tanks were inferior, their planes were inferior, what it said was their technology to pinpoint targets, the accuracy, inferior. Even their body armor, we were told, they were stripping it off the dead Georgians so that the Russians might have the body armor being worn by the Georgians, which obviously was NATO body armor. So this article would have us believe that as recently as 2008, there wasn't so much parity with Russia. Russia was, in fact, an inferior militaristic force. So, wow, in 8 years, their tanks have bigger cannons than ours. Their planes are faster than ours, right? Isn't that interesting? I mean, I don't remember any talk about that, Dad. Just kind of came on us. All of a sudden, the reports come out, Russia's knew this and Russia's knew that. And like I said, geez, I remember when Russia was so broke that their people were starving. They couldn't even get heat in the winter or food in the summer because the oligarchs stole all the money because they were that broke. And here we are a few years later, and now there's parity. And funny enough, no talk about putting a halt on all this military buildup. Oh no, let's look at some of the beautiful articles we got coming this week. Okay, here's the first one that's really fun. Out of Popular Mechanics on April 29th. China successfully tests hypersonic weapon system. Anybody heard of this one? Hypersonic weapon system? Apparently China's the only guy that's got one. We better hope they don't launch it at us before we're ready, because we're not going to have one till 2020, it says. But don't worry, Russia will have one by 2018. So I don't think there's any problem there. Let's see. The DFZF is what is known as a hypersonic glide vehicle. The DFZF is thought to be launched by a DF-21 intermediate range ballistic missile. Unlike a typical ballistic missile warhead, however, a hypersonic glide vehicle stops short of entering space and glides through the atmosphere at speeds of between 4,000 and 7,000 miles an hour. A weapon traveling at such blistering speeds could hit any place on Earth in less than an hour. The unique flight profile of HGVs, hypersonic glide vehicles, not quite a ballistic missile and not quite a regular air-launched missile, combined with its extreme high speed, make them difficult to intercept. The Washington Free Beacon emphasizes Chinese HGVs as a first strike weapon. While theoretically possible, China's strategic nuclear arsenal consists of between 200 to 300 weapons, nowhere near enough to destroy America's nuclear arsenal. First, even if HGVs were used to kick in the door and destroy America's ground-based missile interceptors based in Alaska. Now, I don't know about you, Deb, but I feel like I'm hearing the game plan. Here's how it's going to go. Which would mean it's probably going to happen fairly soon. An operational Chinese hypersonic weapon will likely be a conventional, not nuclear one. An HGV weapon could, for example, target Taiwanese air bases and air defenses, destroying them in minutes and helping China gain air superiority over the breakaway island. Such a weapon could even be used to target individual ships at sea, much like the DF-21D and DF-26 carrier killer ballistic missiles. I'm sorry, did I miss this part in the UN Charter of reducing weapons and conflicts solved by war with all the develop? Are these new weapons? Is this something China's had since the 30s and 40s? Funny that we just keep letting everyone develop these weapons. China's not alone in developing hypersonic weapons. The U.S. Air Force anticipates it will have hypersonic weapons operational by the 2020s. Likely based on experimental vehicles such as the Hypersonic Technology Vehicle 2 and the X-51 Wave Rider. There are reports China is particularly concerned about U.S. development of hypersonics, as they could be used to target China's modest nuclear arsenal without the need for the U.S. to go nuclear. Right? So again, does this sound like buildup of higher tech weapons instead of reduction of weapons? And isn't it interesting that China's already got one of these weapons? When our U.S. Air Force anticipates it might have them operational by the 2020s? Where'd China get all that technology? And, why aren't we concerned about that? Why aren't we concerned about that? That doesn't sound like parity. They can hit anywhere in the world within an hour. And we still got years to catch up. Russia is also developing hypersonic weapons, having conducted a test just 2 weeks ago. The Russian weapon used an SS-19 intercontinental ballistic missile as the booster, and the test was reportedly successful. Meanwhile, the Russian Navy anticipates putting the Zircon anti-ship missile into production in 2018, which will be capable of speeds of up to 3,800 to 4,600 miles an hour. And of course, that's the end of our fantastic journalism. Nothing about what that really means to this whole balance of power and security. Sounds pretty ominous to me. China and Russia are going to have hypersonic weapons that are hard to shoot down before we do? Oh boy, sounds like fun coming. Okay. U.S. once again forced to turn to Russia for help on Syria. Isn't that something, Dad? This whole Syria thing. This little country of 22 million people, half of whom we're told have fled the country as refugees. We had to false flag, start the war with a false flag of chemical weapons that everyone knows were not fired by the Syrian regime. Present Assad as a danger to the world that had to be taken down. Russia comes in unexpectedly. Oh, who expected Russia to protect their only asset in the area? And now, after all this bombing, Russia and America are teaming up to stop the bloodshed. And yet, like we talked about, there's no stoppage of bloodshed. In fact, ever since they teamed up, remember what I said, Dad? You start a peace process, watch for more killing. So ever since they started this Geneva conference to hold a truce, what's happened? The Syrian regime has gone after it. We got more fighting in these major cities. In fact, it's the first time I've seen any video. I've finally seen some pictures of people look like they're running away from battle in these cities. Because, of course, now it is coming to the cities. Now they're blowing up hospitals that are treating the wrong people in the wrong place, right? Meaning Sunni and Shia. They're blowing up Shia hospitals where they're going to have Sunni locations. And so now you got the fight becoming a little, whereas before I'm sure it was a matter of pushing back territorial lines. And that's why we've never seen a picture of anything talking about swaths of territory. So we have some sort of plausible deniability for where you're dumping thousands of bombs from these planes without ever once seeing an actual neighborhood destroyed, where you could look at it and say, yeah, that's a neighborhood. Look at the bikes. Look at the cars. Look at the curtains still hanging from the broken windows. Look at the clothes still hanging on the clotheslines when everyone had to run away. Anybody ever seen anything like that? I haven't. Till just recently, now that we're in a truce. Now that we got a peace process going, oh, heck, we got a little more pictures of killing. We got a little more, what did the first article I talked about say? Assad has taken Russia hostage, and what comes next could be the worst this war has seen. Well, of course, because we're in a peace process. We got the two biggest countries with all the weapons that are supplying all the weapons. They're sitting down talking about, let's stop the bloodshed. So what do the headlines say? The worst this war has seen is what could be coming. And so just like this, from today, May 1st, Matthew Lee, Associated Press, U.S. once again forced to turn to Russia for help on Syria. Isn't that amazing? I wonder why we didn't turn to Russia when they first got into the war and say, whoa, wait a minute. Let's figure out what we're both after. Let's not let this escalate into a real problem with more bloodshed. Nah, let's just keep talking that in the papers while the bloodshed continues. So we have to ask, what's really going on in Aleppo? Well, I'm, in my other study, I'm starting to see how, Aleppo is one of these ancient places of established institutions in that world. Aleppo's an important city. You don't just get to send everybody out of there. You got to go fleece them out, kill all the right people, kill all the right hospitals so they got nowhere to run when you start blowing up their neighborhoods. So yeah, it's all coordinated bloodshed, my friends. Coordinated bloodshed. U.S. forced to turn to Russia for help. Geez, how desperate is America? First, we just can't do anything but pull false flags in Syria. We can't protect a safe zone 60 miles long from our weapons and the troops that we're supporting with our weapons and our intelligence being routed by ISIS. Remember that? Then we got Russia coming in, and oh darn, nobody expected that. Oh, what are we going to do? And then we wait for months until that becomes a real problem where there's chances of escalating this into a U.S.-Russia war. We've already seen the escalation with Turkey. We see the way the Kurds and Turkey and Russia and Syria have all been brought to a turmoil over this, with the killing that just doesn't end. Because, of course, what good's the United Nations, who sets out to, in their charter, to reduce weapons and killing? Again, start to read the reality, and we're going to pull it together in the pulling the strings. United Nations was set up to create wars and to kill people, not the other way around, which is why, hey, when you look at it that way, darn it, no wonder all the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world that come from the CFR and are part of the United Nations, no wonder they're getting it right. They're doing exactly what they were set out to do. They got constant war, constant death, constant turning of the populations to these criminal elites that run these countries to save them from all this war. Funny, it's just the way you read it. Whether one of our friends, Dad, that person from China who's been helping us try to understand the situation with China, he or she recently sent me a thing about the protocols of the elders of Zion. And sure enough, and our cousin Michael talked about that years ago, because it's obvious when you read that, you see the pattern in what's going on in the world. This is what is really going on in the world. I disagree that it's got to do with Zionism. I believe the protocols of the elders of Zion are just like the Communist Manifesto. It had nothing to do with Karl Marx or communism or Russians of any kind. It was a plot by the Rothschilds and to move forward this plan of world domination. That's all this is all about. So, that's what's really going on with the United Nations. They are the wing that the Rothschilds were trying to set up since 1814, that the czars got in the way. And then after World War I, the League of Nations, which the Rothschild puppet, Woodrow Wilson, proposed, but which some Americans, I guess the patriots, I don't know the story intricately enough, but I find it quite interesting that it was the Americans that said, no, we're not giving power over to these guys. So there was still something stinging there from losing the battle with the Federal Reserve, the people that were trying to fight against it, but they said no to that League of Nations. Well, it took until after World War II, so they went back to their plan, World War I, World War II, everything they hoped to accomplish. Let's create a genocide of the Jews so that we can have a reason to scare those people back to the Palestine, so we can steal that from the Muslims so we can set up World War III. And so all that appears to be going as planned, and of course it's run out of the United Nations. That's the arm for which this plan of one world government and the subduing of all national ties, the subduing of all alternative governments or systems of any kind, be they economic, social, or any other kind. That's what the United Nations was set up for. And it took until finally after World War II when there was really no voices left of any power. No, the Tsar stopped it in 1814. Probably some real patriotic Americans that believed in the constitutional idea of freedom and liberty put the stop to it after World War I. But darn it, by World War II, I mean, these people got all of their pawns in place, and now they got their United Nations. And what do you have for the 60 years since? Nothing but covert wars. Nothing but covert wars and military buildup from the one institution that had all the power in the world that claimed what it was going to do is promote peace through the reduction of military. Geez, they just either got it really wrong or they got it really right. And I think they're doing exactly what they set out to do. One of the things, Dad, I think is interesting is, we've been talking about Saudi Arabia for a few years now because the way the prophecy of Daniel seems to present the end-time landscape is that this leader that's going to rise up, who we've been anticipating since at least 2000, would have to be the Hashemite king of Jordan to lead a caliphate. Saudi Arabia, of course, is part of that very special land of their religion. And so I think Daniel calls it the oiliest of the region, something like that. This person would attack. And so we've always seen that at some point this kingdom of Saud was going to be undermined. They've been being used. I've been reading all about that in this guy Livingstone's book. Livingstone. Very interesting history, boy, the way the British set up the Wahhabism and the Ibn Saud and the kingdom of Saud. How that was set up specifically to fight against the Ottomans and the radicalization of Islam. So that's been going on an awful long time. And that's all to a purpose, of course. And it would seem that if this last world war is going to be between the Zionists and the Muslims and all this fomenting of problems, the sectarian problems over there, the religious division of Sunni and Shia, the presentation to the world of this radical Islam, well, it's not going to be hard to trace it back to Saudi Arabia. And so the Saudis are probably feeling how close the end of their reign is coming. And even in their own scriptures, a change has to do with following the death of a Saudi king, which of course just happened in the last few years. So all of this points to a near future in which things in Saudi Arabia are destined to change. I don't think that'll happen until this new caliphate's formed, and then that new caliphate will be resisted by Saudi Arabia and it will take it. But here's what I'm seeing coming out already, where Saudi Arabia is finding itself having to defend itself and capitulate to these Western powers that pull its strings. So this first one's out of the Fiscal Times from April 12th, titled, "The Mysterious 28 Pages on 9/11 That Everyone's Talking About." And it appears that the debate over the pages, which allegedly indicates that the 19 Saudi Arabian nationals who carried out the deadly attacks received some kind of support from the government in Riyadh. So if you get the feeling of that, talk about throwing Saudi Arabia's government under the bus, bringing out some information that points to the fact that these guys were funding it, which of course we know they were. If you look at the way Livingstone recounts the history of Saudi Arabia and the oil industry there, it was all set up as a slush fund for the CIA, all that oil money, so that there's money to create weapons and carry out all these clandestine maneuvers in the world to get the world into the position they're trying. You need money, and you need money that's unaccountable to anyone, especially in America, if you're going to look at as they fought through the relevant and I don't know how to say it, the liberties, the so-called liberties that really were, when you compare it to some of the rest of the world, as I say, thesis and antithesis. Our government of supposed freedom and liberty and democracy is the antithesis. It's the new world order to the old world order of monarchies and religious established power bases, right? The monarchies of Europe were beholden to the popes and the adherence to the religious order in their respective territories, because the people, of course, believed in God and believed that it was important that their leaders followed some sort of religious bias. And, that's part of what America was all set up to do. Get religion out of government so that the crooks and thieves and killers and terrorists could run the world the way they see fit. That's what the New World Order really is. And it's presented to us as all this beautiful liberty and freedom and such. But notice how all these beautiful liberties and freedoms are no longer worth protecting. We don't seem to care about surveillance. We don't seem to care about the way they're persecuting these whistleblowers. Whistleblowing used to be a thing that you couldn't persecute whistleblowers. The country would stand up and fight you and say, wait a minute, this is what we need to keep you government from pulling the wool over our eyes. Now we got Obama, and Bush, and all of them. We can't have whistleblowers at this time showing the world the kind of terrorism that's going on behind the scenes. Our government being used as the greatest terrorist the world's ever known. We can't have that being leaked out by anyone. So the control by these people is astounding. And when you look at how America's come over the last years, it's been to sacrifice all of its liberties, to sacrifice all its private property, and now up into the modern day to sacrifice everything, every shred of liberty, justice, equality. There's nothing left in America. It's all a hollow shell of talk, talk, talk. Underneath it all now are laws about what you can say and when you can say it. A media completely controlled that gives you this kind of journalism. The debate over the pages, which allegedly indicates that the 19 Saudi Arabian nationals who carried out the deadly attacks. Oops, wait a minute, Fiscal Times. Haven't you heard that there's a world of evidence from all the intelligent people that know about building construction, that know about physics, that know about airplanes, that say those 19 Saudi Arabians couldn't have carried out the deadly attacks? Why is it still presented that way without question? See? So it shows you the lies. And what they're doing here, I say, is they're pressuring Saudi Arabia, threatening, in fact, Saudi Arabia. Well, what are they threatening them over? I think we're going to see that right here in this latest article I've got. This is out of a Bloomberg. So this is Bloomberg. This is Rothschilds. By Julian Lee. Title, Saudis heed an oil warning from history. Now what's the oil warning? Don't let the price of oil get too high, because otherwise your enemies who have higher production costs to produce their oil, you're going to give them profits and a leg up in the game. So if you want to stay strong as the leader, in other words, if you don't want to lose your entire kingdom to all the people around you who have been wanting to kill you since Britain set you up, you got to keep selling oil cheap so that all those other countries remain poor or unable to compete. And I say that what's so obvious right now, since it certainly would be we've been presented lately, haven't we, Dad, how Saudi Arabia is coming into a big financial crunch. They can't even afford to pay their own people over there, the slaves that they hire. Because, of course, Saudis don't work. They hire slaves from other countries. And they can't even afford to pay them, apparently. And now they're being told they got to keep selling their oil dirt cheap, which what I read into it is we need that oil to run the wars. Everybody needs it for their tanks and their airplanes and their aircraft carriers and all their war machines. And we're not about to see an increase in oil prices. What's so interesting to me, listen to this paragraph, Dad. Saudi Arabia has seen its share of the key China market being squeezed. While its sales to China have stagnated, those of arch rival Russia have soared. At the end of 2013, Saudi Arabia was selling about twice as much oil to China as Russia was. Now they're vying for top spot with Russian sales, exceeding Saudi Arabia's in several recent months. So how's that if that's not wag the dog, right? Giving Russia the sales. Why? Hey, they got a lot of new weapons to build to get into this third world war that America doesn't seem to be concerned about at all. Why should we be concerned that Russia's making enough money on their oil sales to China, even though we've been told that it's killing Russia? This $40 a barrel oil price is killing Russia. But this Bloomberg article is telling us that Saudi Arabia's got to keep its oil prices low because now Russia's killing them on their sales to China. Isn't it funny, this little triangle here of the people that are our, quote-unquote friends and quote-unquote enemies? That Russia now is selling as much oil to China as Saudi Arabia. We were told not long ago that, every barrel Russia produces and has to sell at $40 is driving their economy broke. But funny, in a broke economy, they produce tanks with bigger guns than ours, airplanes that are faster with better technology weapons than ours. So I just find that interesting. And I think, again, the point that I'm making is Saudi Arabia is being told, you just keep those prices low. Because everybody needs that. All the military equipment we're making and shipping all over the world right now, we're not about to pay $50 or $60 or $80 a barrel when we can pay $30 or $40. So what this thing promises is, this article is promising that you can see you can guarantee the price of oil is going to stay low. That's what I'm getting out of it. So for the near future, price of oil will be extremely low. And then this article I thought was, I love, the people that threaten America, because it's just so obvious that we're the pushover in the world today. Business Insider. Looks like this was from April 17th. Saudis threaten to sell $750 billion in U.S. assets if Congress passes bill that would let 9/11 victims sue Saudi Arabia. So see, I see this as more the threat. This is all part of the threat to Saudi Arabia to stay in line. And so we're threatening, we'll let the 9/11 victims sue you, since now what the other article showed is these 28 pages indicate that the Saudi government funded these 19 hijackers that flew airplanes into our buildings. Love it. We'll stick with that narrative, even though every intelligent person that's bothered to look in the whole world knows that, well, the hijackers turned up alive, so they weren't real. Airplanes can't fly into buildings, so they weren't real. They can't even fly into the ground and leave no airplane parts, so that wasn't real. Buildings don't fall, even if airplanes do hit them, so that wasn't real. But we're threatening to let 9/11 victims sue Saudi Arabia. We won't let them, there's been people that want to let them sue our U.S. government. They want to sue George Bush and Cheney and all the people that really can be connected through a chain of evidence to 9/11. These are the people that had to have put in place the maneuvers that were going on to make it make it confusing on that day to the people who are watching these airplanes go off track and not knowing, is this part of the drill? Are these real airplanes, or is this part of the drill we're running? Oh, really? Who set up that drill? Oh, Dick Cheney, huh? Well, then he's part of this chain of evidence in 9/11, because it's obvious that 9/11 couldn't have happened the way it was reported to without a bunch of people being in on it. Larry Silverstein with his building and his insurance, the people that sold all their airline stock. I mean, these are the people the 9/11 victims should be able to sue. They're the ones that are obviously implicated in the chain of events of 9/11. As far as I've seen, there's nothing whatsoever to implicate the government of Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying they weren't involved, but it certainly wasn't their idea. It certainly wasn't their execution from Saudi Arabia. And as I've told you, what I'm learning is the money that comes in from Saudi Arabian oil sales for 50 years has always been there to fund clandestine terrorism. It's what it was for. It's what they're set up for. So there's probably little doubt that some of their money was siphoned off by Cheney and everybody, the Mossad, whoever the operational institutions were. But probably had very little to do with the government of Saudi Arabia, except in signing a check to these sort of people who they knew they had to sign the check to. So anyway, so Saudi threatening to sell off a bunch of our assets if Congress does that. So just to bring us back into the world in which the primary focus is hostility, buildup of weapons, and continued warfare. That's what's really going on and going to keep going on until the war gets here. I say we're in the wars and rumors of wars. Part of Matthew, in which the apostles ask, well, when's this going to happen? And the sign of your coming. And Jesus says there'll be wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise up against nation, but this is natural. Don't be alarmed at that. So I say there's still a few years to go, because we're in the don't be alarmed at this part. And nothing we can do is the way I read what Jesus is telling them. There's nothing you can do about this. This whole buildup of arms, buildup of hostilities, the buildup of the need to fight is got to happen, because that's World War III has got to happen. Armageddon's got to happen. But the sign for them that Jesus told them to look out for is, you'll be handed over to be persecuted for my name's sake. And when you see the abomination spoken of by the prophet Daniel, run for the hills. So these are the two signs really of the end. Jews being handed over to be persecuted on account of Jesus of Nazareth, which is a hard thing to imagine in the modern day, and the abomination of desolation in the temple. Well, since there isn't a temple and hasn't been for 2,000 years, then we got to assume we're waiting for the temple to be rebuilt, which, funny enough, is what they all want to do. And they've even set up their Temple Institute. They've been, they got the red heifer ready to slaughter. They've been training the priests, as if somebody behind the scenes knows that it's all going to happen. And when you look at this group of, the string pullers, the people that run the world, what do they want to do? They want to rebuild Solomon's temple. Isn't that interesting? I mean, isn't that just a quirky little, thread running through all this? These aren't Zionists that want to rebuild the third temple. They're Masons. Professed Christians. What do the Christians want to build another temple for? Right? Because they're not really Christians. They're, as most people will show you, what they really are is Luciferians that operate under the guise of Christianity. And of course, most of their masses don't know the difference because they're too stupid. They're brainwashed into a fraternal organization that's essentially there to help them get ahead in business. help them make more money than their neighbors. And so they're willing to do whatever it takes to do that, of course. Praise Jesus, praise Satan, tell me who to praise. Tell me which initiation to go through. But the people at the top, what they want to do, all their symbols come from the Temple of Solomon. They claim they're following, what's his name? Abib? Abram? I can't remember his name. You know, Dad. The one that supposedly built Solomon's temple, that was killed in the temple and all this kind of thing. That's who the Masons claim their descendancy to. Of course, none of that's really true. It's just a story as far as the Masons and Hiram Abiff. There's no real evidence that Hiram Abiff was killed or that the Masons are descendants from Hiram Abiff. That's all something that's been added on to their story over time to give it some sort of plausible deniability. But interesting that these people who claim to be Christians on the outside, a Christian fraternity, that descend from Hiram Abiff, they just want to rebuild a third temple. And they don't want to rebuild it for Jesus, of course, because there's no need for another temple once Jesus has come. So, that's where the story really takes on now the deeper characteristics of what's happening in the world, and why I think it's even more interesting right now for me, Dad, to be studying the history. How did we get from Solomon's temple to Herod's temple, and then how do we get to Herod's temple to here, where you got this contingency of Zionists, that appear to have been funded by the Rothschilds, who also funded the Illuminati and the Masonic, all these different institutions that want to rebuild Solomon's temple. And that in their higher levels of initiation, and even in the lower ones, the name of Jesus is something they don't like to use at all. And in the higher levels, it's forbidden. They hate Jesus. They hate Jehovah. He's the deceiver. He's the one that's got the world stuck in ignorance and religion and superstition, which is what they want to do away with for their new world order. So anyway, thought I'd just try and catch us up on some of the stuff this week. I also noticed, Dad, in passing, that the EU's putting more pressure on to grant the Turks their visa-free travel so that the Turks don't send more refugees, as was threatened. And what I find funny with this, of course, is it will be those very same Turks on visa-free travel that will facilitate the false flags of the future, since the mercenary armies come from us. ISIS are the mercenary armies supported by America, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and the quote-unquote allies. So Turkey being on that side, these Turkish visas will simply facilitate the false flags that are coming, I think. I think that's the nature of these visa-free travel for Turks. You don't have to know who they are anymore. If they come out of Turkey and have a Turkish passport, zip, they get to come right into Europe. So I think that's what that whole threat's been about, with this, using this refugee thing as leverage to get access to Europe, so that when they start blowing up Europe, it can be blamed on the refugees and all sorts of things, when in fact, the refugees are probably, these people running from the war with nothing, are probably the last people that intend to go find some terrorist cell to join. They're probably mostly the people that know that it's all a bunch of BS, because they know that their country's being taken over and oppressed right now by mercenaries that have nothing to do with fighting Assad. And that's why Assad's left in power, to keep fighting. And as I predicted several weeks ago, when they claimed this truce, watch for the bloodshed to increase. If they say peace, watch for war. If they say friends, if they say treaty, beware of war. Because that's all that's coming, guys. World War III. That's all that's really happening, is the setup to World War III, because that's where they're at in their scheme. There's nowhere left for them to go, which is why now's the time, from 2008, when Russia couldn't even could hardly hold themselves against a tiny little fracas in the sense of volume like they had in Georgia, to where 8 years later they're flying sorties over Syria with superior weapons to America. Geez, how'd that all happen? Somebody's been pumping the money they've been stealing from the people, right? The housing bubble, all this money that they've been stealing from the populations of the world for centuries, but at least this last century that they've been on a plan. All that money's resulting in all these weapons, funny enough. So that's the way I look at it. It's their time. The end times isn't because God finally can't take it anymore. The end times is because it's finally their time to move the plan to the next stage, create World War III, rebuild the temple, form their new world government, the new world without religion. It's time for that. It's time for them. And it's the wrath of God that gets poured out on that blasphemy, that attempt by these people worshiping Satan to take over the world and slaughter the last remaining Jews and Christians so that there won't be anything left. I mean, there'll be nobody left to claim God or Jesus. And then, right, how does the devil not win? It's still like, okay, God, it's your world. Have you got anybody left following you? It's your world, but they're my people. I mean, doesn't that make more sense in this spiritual battle for good and evil, for the souls of men? If that's, the anthropocentric way of visualizing it, that if the devil can say, well, hey, where's your Christians? Where's your Jews? Who's praising you? They're all praising me. You don't have anybody left. I killed them all. Ha ha ha. So I really think that's the ultimate plan, and why it says in Revelation, if God didn't shorten the time, there'd be no flesh left to save. That might not mean flesh as in all flesh. It might mean flesh as in his people. There'd be nobody left to start that kingdom with that he promised through the prophets. That remnant wouldn't exist. And therefore, how does God fulfill his word if the remnant of people no longer exist? Who's he going to get? So I think that's the plan. I think that's what we're coming to. And I think right now we're in the wars and rumors of wars, Dad. And we'll just have to keep watching that develop. But I'm still of the mind that the study over these next years is in piecing together who really is pulling these strings, identifying the characters and the institutions that we at least might be knowledgeable. Christianity's been sucked into being used as a tool. And if more Christians were knowledgeable about that fact, well, I doubt it would change the result. But it certainly, could on an ideological level. Just like if every American were to band together arm in arm and throw that government out and start over, we could do that. They've been saying it for a long time. We just won't. We've been psychologically conditioned like cattle. They look at Americans like sheep, like cattle. Moo. Meh. And we go where they push us. And I say they're pushing us to World War III. So everybody take care of each other out there and keep loving one another, because you're not going to stop this war, but you might at least enlighten your neighbor. You might at least find some sort of spiritual solace as this comes to pass, and perhaps when it comes to pass, we might be of some use, since what's going to come to pass is the propagation of all the lies as truth. It's more than just the killing of the people. The devil can't win unless all the people that are left believe his lie, believe that Jesus was a deceiver, that Jehovah was a maniacal God of death and destruction, which if you read the Old Testament is not a hard line to draw. right? If any of that's true, it's pretty scary. Go in there and kill every single one of them. Women, children, cattle, don't leave a single one alive. Does that sound like a God of love to you? So it's not going to be so hard for them to present the case that the Old Testament was based on a bloodthirsty, tyrannical God, and that Jesus was simply the outbirth in a deception of hypocrisy and ignorance, and that what the new leaders, the new messiahs, the enlightened ones are bringing to the world after the war is a new world in which that will no longer be allowed. You will not be allowed to be a Christian, because look at what Christianity did. And all the people that are left are going to applaud that stance and say, yeah, you got to shut up. You got to stop claiming this Christianity, or we'll lock you away. We'll kill you. Because otherwise, you'll kill all us. And I think that's the story that's really coming down. And so if it wasn't for the few of us that are really enlightened to our own story from the God as we know God, the Scriptures the way we perceive it, those Scriptures are going to be tested. And the people that are part of this giant congregation of Santa Claus Christianity of the West, and I think even the Catholic Church, or perhaps especially, but the both, are going to be shown to be complete destructive superstitions. And so if you don't have a story left to argue it, right, you're not going to be able to help anyone. If you're still arguing the modern Santa Claus Christianity, you're going to be hurting the Christian story at that point. And so, and I say that point is this 7-year period in which all of these prophecies are going to take place, and in which the Christians are going to be used as a tool, and this very small group of us, perhaps known as Paul's brethren, that are children of the day and of the light, that won't be taken by surprise when that day comes. We're watching for it. We're looking for it. And when it comes, like the two witnesses that are going to be saying, hey, don't build that temple. That's going to bring the wrath of God. You can't do that. We're going to be persecuted by the world in those last 7 years. In every way. The ones that are closest to it are going to be persecuted with their life, I think. And the ones like me, if I manage to stay out of that line of fire, are simply going to be persecuted by all my friends. Everyone around me watching the news. Everyone around me, even the Christians that are so ready to go fight for Israel. Most of them are going to buy into the lie because they've been set up for it. They're waiting for a rapture that isn't even in the Scripture. They're supporting Israel rather than identifying them as a synagogue of Satan. They're waiting for God to rapture them to the Club Med in the sky before he kills everybody else. And aren't they going to be disappointed when none of that comes off like they imagine it will be? Aren't they going to be disillusioned and open to somebody else's suggestion about who the Messiah really is? So I don't know. I feel, Dad, that must be what the Lord continues to bless us with remaining intact. And having this small group of people who continue to confer and confirm and, provide their insight and keep this story alive in the world. And I don't expect it will ever be anything but a small story, but I am consoled to the fact that I think it's probably one of the most important stories. It certainly feels that way to me as I get closer and closer to the darkness closing in on the world that would threaten to stomp out the light altogether and turn Jesus into an evil deceiver instead of the embodiment of love that would give his life for a friend, that would turn the other cheek, that would love his enemies, all the things that Christianity is really supposed to be and has abandoned over the centuries. Anyway, Dad, thanks for having me on the show. Look forward to next week. Love you.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment, drop us a line, subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.